Hi, I'm HiViz Pro Shooter K. Miculek. Today I'm going to talk to you about trigger cycle. Have you ever really considered what's involved in pulling and releasing the trigger? It's a lot more complicated than you might think. Let's have a look. Alright, there are actually quite a few steps in the pulling of the trigger. The first is the trigger pre-travel. And the pre-travel, believe it or not, is divided into 3 separate steps. The first step is the take-up. The take-up is the movement from the trigger's resting position until you hit the wall. The wall is a point in the trigger pull where you're going to feel more resistance on the trigger. And at this point, it's going to take more pressure out from your finger to continue that rearward movement of the trigger. So now I'm going to push through the wall with more pressure on the trigger. If your trigger happens to have creep in it, you're going to feel it now. My trigger does not have creep in it, but that would be movement between the wall and the brake. But I'm going to push on through to the brake, which is where the gun would actually fire. Sometime there is over travel, which would be movement of the trigger to the rear after the gun is fired. Now, once I pull the trigger, the gun is fired. I'm going to cock it as it would do in a live situation. Now, I'm only going to release the trigger until the trigger mechanism resets. About the point right there on my M&P is where I feel the trigger and I actually heard it reset. So now the trigger is ready to pull again. And as you can see on the second trigger pull, most of that take-up, if not all of that take-up, was not present in that second trigger pull. If you only release enough to reset, most of the take-up is removed already. So those are the steps of the trigger pull. If you ever want to be a really good shooter, you need to understand those steps and then apply that to trigger control, which is in an upcoming video. And by the way, if you don't have HiViz sights on your gun, you should see what you're missing.